the world is not collapsing. It is rearranging itself quietly, systematically, without asking for your permission. In 2026, wars will not always start with bombs. They will start with minerals, with prices, with decisions buried in trade agreements and export controls. You won't see the explosion. You will feel it at the checkout counter, on your energy bill, in the cost of safety itself. I want you to understand something clearly. This is not chaos. This is design, a world where power no longer comes only from armies, but from supply chains, from electricity, from who controls what the future needs most. Some countries are preparing, others are reacting, and most people like you, are left wondering why everything feels tighter, riskier, more unstable. If you've sensed that the global system is shifting under your feet, you're not imagining it. This video is about how that shift works and why 2026 is the year it becomes impossible to ignore. If this matters to you, stay with me. And if it already feels familiar, share it with someone who should be paying attention. Because before we talk about outcomes, we need to understand the problem itself. And that's where we go next. What we are seeing is not one crisis. It is 5 pressures converging. Each looks separate, but they move together. Critical minerals decide who can build weapons and who can build economies. Tariffs decide who absorbs political choices. Corporations, exporters, or you, arms control once slowed the nuclear clock. That clock is ticking again. With fewer rules and more players, electricity is no longer just power. It is leverage. China understands this better than anyone. And when global systems fracture, humanitarian aid is the first thing cut. Not because it matters least, but because its victims have the least voice. This is the pattern. Security hardens at the top. Risk flows downward. What ties all of this together is not ideology. It is system stress. A world built for efficiency is being forced to operate under rivalry. When systems are stressed, they reveal who they were really designed to protect. To understand why 2026 feels different, we need to look backward, not at events, but at how we got here. That's the next step. To understand 2026, we have to rewind, not years, decades. After the Cold War, the world optimized for efficiency. Cheap energy, open trade, long supply chains, trust over redundancy. China became the factory. Russia became the fuel. The United States became the market and the security provider. It worked until it didn't. As technology advanced, minerals replaced oil as the strategic choke point. Cobalt, rare earths, processing capacity. At the same time, globalization lowered prices. But it also hollowed out resilience. When shocks came, there were no buffers left. Arms control followed a similar path. Treaties reduced risk. Transparency reduced fear. But as rivalry returned, cooperation collapsed. Energy changed too. Electricity moved from infrastructure to strategy. Grids, batteries, and panels became tools of influence. And when conflicts multiplied, aid systems stretched thin. Budgets tightened. Cuts followed. The most vulnerable paid first. None of this happened suddenly. It happened in cycles. Each decision made sense on its own. Together, they created fragility. And in 2026, that fragility starts to crack. Because history doesn't repeat itself. It accumulates pressure, and pressure always finds a breaking point. That breaking point comes next. The first crack is already visible, and it starts with minerals. In 2025, China didn't fire a shot. It pulled a lever. Export controls, processing technology, rare earth magnets. Suddenly, factories slowed, supply chains froze, entire industries realized how exposed they were. This wasn't symbolic, it was structural. China doesn't just mine many critical minerals, it processes them at scale, at speed, with near total dominance. That control turned dependency into leverage, and leverage into power. The United States saw the risk, so did its allies. Executive orders followed. Loans, guarantees, alliance. But here's the problem. Building mines takes years. Building trust takes longer. And global demand is rising faster than either. This is what makes this moment dangerous. Not hostility. Timing. When supply is tight and concentration is high, every restriction feels like a threat. Every delay feels like coercion. If you're wondering why governments suddenly sound anxious, this is why. And if you think this is only about geopolitics, it isn't. Because when system seize up at the top, the pressure doesn't stay there. If this helped you see the shift more clearly, pause and make sure others see it too. Because the next pressure point hits much closer to home. What matters now is not the headline. It's the mechanism underneath. Critical minerals are not scarce by nature. They are scarce by design. Extraction is messy. Processing is expensive. And environmental costs push production into fewer hands. Over time, efficiency won. Concentration followed. China didn't just control supply. It controlled the middle, the refining, the processing, the know-how. That's the choke point. The United States can mine more, allies can mine more, but without processing capacity, raw materials sit idle. This is why industrial policy returned. Price floors, long-term contracts, government-backed risk, not to dominate markets, but to survive them. The same logic applies elsewhere. Tariffs are not about trade, they are about leverage. Arms treaties are not about trust, they are about predictability. Aid budgets are not about generosity, they are about stability. When these mechanisms weaken, systems don't fail immediately. They distort, costs shift, risks migrate. Uncertainty spreads, and it rarely spreads upward, which is why the next shock doesn't arrive as policy. It arrives as pain. And that brings us to the second rupture. The second rupture doesn't come from scarcity. It comes from price. Tariffs sound abstract. They are not. They move quietly from policy papers into receipts. At first, companies absorb the shock. They dip into inventory, they wait, they hope the policy is temporary. But when tariffs stay, behavior changes. Importers look elsewhere. Exporters cut what they can. And then the cost moves again. This time, it moves to you. By late 2025, the shift was visible. Consumers began carrying more of the burden, not suddenly, gradually, almost politely. Inflation didn't spike. It crept. This is how pressure works in modern systems. It avoids headlines, it hides in averages, and once it settles, it's hard to reverse. The danger isn't just higher prices. It's the combination, slower growth, higher costs, less room to maneuver. That's how stagnation forms. Not through collapse, but through exhaustion. If you've felt that tension, working harder for less certainty, this is where it comes from. And while households adjust, another safeguard is quietly disappearing. One that once kept the ultimate risk in check. That's where we turn next. This is where the story stops being abstract and becomes personal, because systems don't feel pressure. People do. When prices rise slowly, you adapt. You cut back, you delay, you accept less, not because you want to, but because you have to. Tariffs don't announce themselves. They show up in groceries, in rent, in energy bills, in choices you didn't expect to make. And while you're adjusting, protections elsewhere are being removed. Foreign aid is being cut quietly, deeply For millions of women, this isn't about economics. It's about survival. Healthcare disappears. Food security weakens. Safety vanishes. When aid collapses, women absorb the shock first. And longest, you may never see them, but the instability reaches you anyway, through migration, through conflict, through a world that feels harsher and less predictable. This is how global decisions land in everyday life, not as headlines, but as weight. If this resonates with you, don't ignore it. Pay attention, talk about it, share it, because understanding pressure is the first step to resisting it. And the pressure doesn't stop at borders. Pressure never stays local. It travels. When minerals are restricted, production shifts. When prices rise, demand weakens. When aid collapses, instability spreads outward. This is how domestic policy becomes global consequence. Critical minerals pull countries into new alliances. Some compete, others hedge. Few feel secure. Tariffs redraw trade routes, not cleanly, but inefficiently. Friction replaces flow. As arms control fades, uncertainty grows. Without transparency, mistrust fills the gap. Miscalculation becomes more likely than intention. Meanwhile, China's electrification changes the map. Not with bases, with grids, with panels, with batteries. Energy exporters become energy builders. Importers gain options, but also new dependencies. And when aid dries up, fragile states weaken further. Conflict zones expand, human displacement increases. No border stays untouched. This is the global pattern forming in 2026. Less cooperation, more hedging, higher risk everywhere, not because leaders want chaos, but because systems are colliding. If the world feels tighter, more volatile, more fragmented, it's because it is. The question now isn't what happens next. It's which future we slide into. That choice still exists, and that's where we go next. The future doesn't arrive as one outcome. It branches from here. 3 paths are visible. The first is managed adjustment. Governments coordinate, supply chains diversify, tariffs ease where they do more harm than good. New mineral capacity comes online, risk stays high but contained. The system bends. It doesn't break. The second path is slow fracture. Policies stay in place, costs keep shifting downward, arms control fades without replacement. Aid never recovers. Nothing collapses. But everything feels heavier. Growth slows. Tensions harden. The world adjusts to permanent strain. The third path is system shock. Mineral restrictions escalate. Trade wars deepen. Nuclear transparency disappears. A miscalculation happens. Not because someone wanted disaster, but because no one rebuilt the guardrails. Here's the truth. All 3 futures are plausible. None are inevitable. Systems don't choose paths. People do, through policies, through pressure, through what they tolerate and what they refuse to ignore. 2026 doesn't decide everything, but it locks in direction. And direction, once set, is hard to reverse. So before we end, there's one final question worth asking. What does all of this demand from you? That's where we close. Here's the hardest truth. None of this is distant. You are not watching history. You are living inside its mechanics. Every system I've described works because most people don't see it. Don't question it. Don't slow it down. But awareness changes leverage. When you understand why prices rise, you stop blaming shadows. When you see how power moves through minerals, tariffs, electricity, aid, you stop mistaking symptoms for causes. This is not about panic. It's about clarity. Because the future isn't decided by predictions. It's decided by pressure points. What gets challenged? What gets accepted? What gets normalized? 2026 is not the end of an era. It's the moment the direction becomes obvious. The question is whether enough people are paying attention before the path hardens. If this video helped you see the system more clearly, don't let it end here. Share it, talk about it, keep asking how power actually works, because the next chapter won't ask for your consent either. And understanding may be the only advantage you get. We'll pick this up next time.